Have you ever wanted to travel back in time and play your favorite retro games again? Well, now's your opportunity. These aren't anything new, but these are flashcards. This is my review for the Ultra 64 flashcard, starting off with price. It's $120 on Amazon. I have only found this on Amazon.com. You might be able to find this on eBay, so take that into consideration when you are looking for a flashcard. There are other flashcards available on eBay and Amazon, so take your pick. This is the one that I got as a Christmas gift. This has a basic N64 cartridge design with an included 16GB SD card full of games for both the US and the European market, as well as some Japanese games prepped in. On top of the cartridge is a switch labeled N and P. This is for the US and the EU markets, N being NTSC and P being PAL. Depending on where your console originated from, you'll need to use this switch to make sure that the cartridge loads and plays. Don't ask me how I know this. In the box, you basically get the cartridge, the SD card, an instruction manual, and a branded miniature calendar. As for the games that are installed in the SD card, I will leave those here for a few minutes so all of you guys can see all of the games for the US, EU, and Japanese market, as there are hundreds of games that are installed. I'm not going to read off every single one, so feel free to pause and screenshot and see if these video game cartridge is worth buying with your own hard-earned money. One thing that I would like to mention about saving on this cartridge, you may still need an actual memory card depending on which games you are playing. There are only a few games that I have played so far on this list, which is actually a pretty big list, that will save onto the actual SD card by itself, and other games, like I mentioned, you will probably need a memory card. GoldenEye being one of those that will save directly to the SD card, so take that into consideration as well. Once you insert this cartridge into your Nintendo 64 and hit the power switch, you are going to be greeted with this menu system. Basically, all the way down, you get USA games at the top, European games in slot number 2, and then you have a bunch of other things below that, like wallpapers, test games, system volume information, and basically the software to run this. Now you are able to add games to a favorites list, so if you have 10 of your favorite games, you can go ahead and add those to that list. You can choose the SD card speed, the font size, and the TV mode, so you can put this in NTSC, PAL, or Auto. Now here's a little screenshot of the controls. There is a website. I tried to go onto that website, but unfortunately that website no longer works. As far as the controls for the menu system itself, up and down is to select files, left or right is to switch pages, start is to load the selected game, up C button is to reload the last game, C down is a file functions button, left and right trigger is the different types of saves you can do, A is open or apply the directory, B is back, and Z is for the menu, which is that little menu that I showed you earlier, which basically just kind of shows you how to add favorites, choose your options, and stuff like that. And a few other things that I want to touch on really quick before I teach you guys how to make a copy of the SD card. For starters, I purchased a Nintendo 64 to HDMI converter. This cable does not work with this cartridge. Basically, when I plugged this cable into my Nintendo 64 and turned the game on, it didn't load, and I think it's mostly because in the instructions for this converter specifically, it says that some games that are designed for 240p will not project, so it did not work with this cable specifically. It does, however, work with my AV to HDMI converter, so take that into consideration as well. Another thing that I kind of dislike, which with advancements in technology, I figured they could have figured out a way to make it to where I can just press a button to go back to the menu. Unfortunately, if you want to switch games, you have to go and hit the reset button on the Nintendo 64. I feel that they probably could have put a patch in here somewhere, allowing you to press a series of buttons which would take you back out to the menu, but I digress. Alright, so let's go ahead and make a copy of this card. So take the SD card out, put it into your micro SD to SD card adapter, throw that in the computer, and basically you're going to, if you have a second slot, you're going to take a second micro SD card. Now this has to be a micro SD card HC. For some reason, the micro SD cards that are XC do not work. I'm not really 100% sure why. I believe there is also a maximum of 32 gigabytes. So I did find a 32 gigabyte HC style micro SD card and I used that instead. Once you have both SD cards inserted into your computer, go ahead and start the transfer from there. It's going to take probably about 10 to 15 minutes depending on how fast your computer is. Also, with your new SD card you are transferring to, make sure that it is formatted correctly. Basically just exFAT32 or whatever it is. Just make sure it's formatted and clean, so this way you have nothing else on there and that there's nothing crazy going on with the SD card. Once you have everything transferred, you will notice that you will get a pop-up on the screen that basically says, once you have everything transferred to the new SD card, by the end of the transfer, you might see an unspecified error notice pop up. Basically, it says, an unexpected error is keeping you from copying this folder. If you continue to receive this error, you'll use this error code to search help for blah, 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 blah. Anyways, this happened to me a couple of times on a couple of different micro SD cards. I couldn't figure it out and it took me a little bit, but basically, long story short, just hit skip at this point. What happens is the ED64P file from the original SD card will not transfer. So you have to download the ED64P zip file, and I will link that down in the description. Once you do that, you're going to unzip this into the new SD card, or extract it all to the new SD card. And you have to actually go in and choose the SD card that you are transferring it to. So your brand new one, you're going to unzip that ED64P file in there. That'll take about a minute or two, give or take, depending on how fast your computer is. I think it took mine probably about 20 or 30 seconds. At this point, you can just go ahead and make sure that everything is transferred on there. You might get an error where it says it like needs to copy more files. Just make sure you keep the ones that are already on the SD card and then just hit eject. You should then be able to take this SD card and put it into your cartridge. And when you pop it into your Nintendo 64, everything should work. It may take some of the games a little bit longer to load. I'm not really 100% sure exactly why that happens, but just take that into account. Also, if you are interested, you can add more ROMs to this SD card. Basically, you just want to find a list of Nintendo 64 ROMs, download the one that you want that may not be on this cartridge, and then you can go ahead and apply it to any of those folders. I actually made a folder for itself, so this way when I loaded it, everything showed up in that folder and I was able to start that game. Now let me talk about some of these games on here. So like I mentioned, this has a lot of games, and I'm pretty much almost entirely sure that all the games that are on here are pretty much the entire Nintendo 64 list, like a full list of pretty much almost every single game that Nintendo released for the Nintendo 64. A ton of very popular and very playable games on here. You got GoldenEye, you got WWF, you got WCW, you got Cruis'n USA, you have all different types of games. Conker's Bad Fur Day, Top Gear Rally, you got South Park. I mean, the list honestly goes on and on. And I think at the end of the day, if you are somebody that grew up in the 90s playing Nintendo 64, you know, when I was a kid, I got my very first Nintendo 64 in like winter of 97, I think it was. I'm going back and playing all these old games, and it's super nostalgic to just go back, play that game, and kind of relive those memories. Now, I will say that I do kind of hate the fact that you actually have to either get up to restart the console if you want to play another game, as well as not every single one of the games will save directly to the SD card. As far as that goes, I'm not necessarily too concerned. I think there is a way to change the save options, so it might be one of those things where you might have to try it and see which game saves to what save file. So take that into account. But I have been using this with my original Nintendo 64 memory card, and it does save directly to that as well. So in all, I mean, being somebody that had grown up in the 90s, played the Nintendo 64, and played all these amazing games when I was in my teens and early 20s, I think it's nice to have that nostalgic kick where if you have a wireless controller for your Nintendo 64, which I did make a review on one of those, but it's nice to kick back in your bed, on a couch, in a chair, and just sit back, relax without having like a huge cable connected to the N64 and the controller. It makes it a lot easier to just kind of kick back and play these old games. And the nostalgic factor is one of those things where I think this is a really good purchase for anybody that just wants to have one console and one video game with tons of games on that console. Now, that's why I mentioned I would make a copy of this, because there's no telling how good or strong the SD card that they send with this is. As of right now, it's been about a month since I've got this as a gift. So I've been playing it pretty hardcore, especially recording all this stuff for you guys. And I think at the end of the day, for 120 bucks, even if you can get them cheaper than that, like I said, there are some other ones on Amazon and eBay, like the EverDrives and some of those. Some of them are clones or whatever, but even if you bought this one off Amazon, and that's actually how I found it, was on Amazon, put it on my Christmas wish list and got that for Christmas. So even if you bought this for 120 bucks, I think it's well worth it, especially because you would spend that much in just purchasing the cartridges by themselves, and then you're going to have to get, you know, something to keep all those cartridges in. Having this one game, you can basically leave it in the Nintendo 64, flip that switch whenever you want, and just go to town. So in all, I think this is a killer purchase for a couple of different reasons. Number one being that it has 90% of all the games any 90s kid would ever want to play. And number two being that for $120 US, it's minimalistic terms of owning just a one cartridge for one system and being able to play all of those old games you used to love as a kid. My only gripe is that you have to get up and hit the reset button if you want to play another game. Not a huge deal, but it would have been cool if they had programmed some sort of a button combination to get back to the menu screen. Also, something to note as well, the company that makes this cartridge recommends not flipping the power switch on and off rapidly, as it could damage the cartridge. So if you're having problems loading anything, try hitting the reset button first. If that doesn't work, turn the console off, wait about 15 or so seconds before turning it on again.